Welcome to BeFM Drama. I'm your host, Joshua Cornwell, and this week we're bringing you our adaptation of The Dancing Men, a classic Sherlock Holmes story by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. In our third episode, Holmes and Watson rush from London to the rural county of Norfolk, the home of their client Hilton Cubitt, a country gentleman whose American wife has been harassed with a bizarre series of messages consisting of lines of dancing stick figures. Holmes has cracked the code of the dancing men, but the last message has left him deeply worried and led him to rush to Norfolk. And so, at last, I come to the dark conclusion of a story which had, until then, seemed to only be childish and bizarre. If only I had some brighter ending to tell. But these are the facts, and I must follow them. We had hardly arrived at North Walsham Station that morning, and mentioned the name of our destination, before the station master hurried towards us.
I suppose that you're detectives from London.
A look of annoyance passed over Holmes's face.
What makes you think such a thing?
Because Inspector Martin from Norwich has just passed through. But maybe you are the surgeons. She's not dead, or wasn't, last I heard. You may be in time to save her yet, even if she'll be hung afterwards.
Holmes's brow was dark with anxiety.
We are going to Ridingthorpe Manor, but we have heard nothing of what has happened there.
It's a terrible business. They're shot, both Mr. Hilton Cubitt and his wife. She shot him, and then herself. That's what the servants say. He's dead, and her life is despaired of. Dear, dear, one of the oldest families in the county of Norfolk, and one of the most honored.
Without a word, Holmes hurried to a carriage, and during the long 7-mile drive, he never once opened his mouth. He had been uneasy during all of our journey from town, and now this sudden realization of his worst fears left him blank and melancholy. He leaned back in his seat, lost in gloomy speculation, until we arrived at Ridingthorpe Manor. As we drove up to the front door, I noticed the black tool house and the sundial where the dancing men had appeared. A dapper little man, with a quick, alert manner and a waxed mustache, stood by the door. He introduced himself as Inspector Martin of the Norfolk Police, and he was astonished when he heard the name of my companion.
Why, Mr. Holmes? The crime was committed at 3 a.m. How could you hear of it in London and get to the spot as soon as I?
I anticipated it. I came in the hope of preventing it.
Then you must have some important evidence unknown to the police. It's baffling. They were said to be a most united couple.
I have only the evidence of the dancing men. I will explain the matter to you later. Meanwhile, since it is too late to prevent this tragedy, I am anxious that I should use my knowledge to ensure that justice is done.
I would be proud to feel that we were acting together, Mr. Holmes.
In that case, I would be glad to hear the evidence and examine the scene without any unnecessary delay.
Inspector Martin had the good sense to allow my friend to do things in his own way. The local surgeon reported that Mrs. Elsie Cubitt's injuries were serious, but not necessarily fatal. The bullet had passed through the front of her brain, and it would probably be some time before she could regain consciousness. The surgeon could not say with certainty whether she'd been shot or had shot herself. Certainly the bullet had been fired from very close range. There was only the one revolver found in the room, 2 chambers of which had been fired. Mr. Hilton Cubitt had been shot through the heart. It was equally possible that he had shot his wife and then himself, or that she had been the criminal, for the revolver lay on the floor midway between them. Holmes stared at the body of our former client.
Has it been moved?
We have moved nothing except the lady. We would not leave her lying bleeding on the floor.
How long have you been here, Inspector?
Since 4 o'clock.
Anyone else?
Yes, the constable here.
And have you touched nothing?
Nothing.
You've acted with great discretion. Who sent for you?
The housemaid, Saunders.
Was it her who gave the alarm?
Her and Mr. King, the cook.
Where are they now?
In the kitchen, I believe.
Then I think we had better hear their story at once.
The old hall became a court of investigation. Holmes sat in a great old-fashioned chair, his eyes gleaming. I knew his purpose was set, and that he'd devote his life to his quest until the client he had failed to save was avenged. The trim Inspector Martin and a stolid village constable and myself made up the rest of the strange company. The servants told their story clearly enough. They had been woken by the sound of an explosion, followed a minute later by a second one. The door of the study was open, and a candle was burning on the table. Hilton lay upon his face in the center of the room, quite dead. Near the window his wife was crouching, her head against the wall, horribly wounded and covered in blood. Both the hallway and the study were full of smoke and the smell of gunpowder. The window was shut and fastened on the inside. Both servants were positive of that fact. They had sent for a doctor and the police, and carried their injured mistress to her room. Elsie Cubitt was dressed in her nightdress, and Hilton in his dressing gown. Nothing had been moved in the study. As far as the servants knew, there had never been any fights between the husband and wife. They had always been a very united couple. These were the main points of the servants' evidence. They were clear that every door was locked from the inside, and that no one could have escaped from the house. They both remembered that they were aware of the smell of gunpowder from the moment that they ran out of their rooms on the top floor. Holmes nodded when he heard that.
We should pay careful attention to that fact, Inspector, and now I think that we should make an examination of the study.
It was a small study, lined on 3 sides with books, with a writing table facing the window, which looked out at the garden. First, we examined the body of the unfortunate squire, lying stretched out on the floor. His messy clothes showed that he had leapt quickly from bed. The bullet had been fired at him from the front, and lodged in his heart, leaving no exit wound. There was no gunpowder residue on his dressing gown or on his hands. According to the country surgeon, the lady had gunpowder stains on her face, but none on her hands either.
The absence of powder stains on her hands means nothing, though its presence would mean everything. Unless the powder from a badly fitting cartridge spurts backwards, one can fire many shots without leaving a sign on the hands. Mr. Cubitt's body may now be removed. I suppose the surgeon has not removed the bullet which wounded the lady?
No, and a serious surgery will be necessary before that can be done. But there are still 4 cartridges left in the revolver. 2 have been fired and 2 wounds inflicted. Each bullet can be accounted for.
Then can you account for the bullet that has so obviously hit the edge of the window?
He had turned suddenly, and his long, thin finger was pointing at a bullet hole, which had been drilled right through the windowsill, about an inch above the bottom.
By George! However did you see that?
Because I looked for it.
Wonderful. You're certainly right, sir. A 3rd shot has been fired, and therefore a 3rd person must have been here. But who could it be? And how could he have gotten away?
That is the problem which we are about to solve. You remember, Martin, when the servants said that they could smell gunpowder the moment they left their rooms?
Yes, sir, but I do not see the importance.
It suggested that at the time of firing, the window and door of the study had been open. Otherwise, the powder fumes could not have been blown so quickly through the house. A draft was necessary for that. Both the door and the window were only open for a very short time, however.
How do you prove that?
Look at the candle. It is melted evenly. If the draft had lasted more than a minute or 2, it would be slightly guttered.
Brilliant.
Feeling sure that the window had been open at the time of the tragedy, I guessed that there must have been a 3rd person who stood outside the window and fired through it. Any shot fired back at this person might hit the sill. I looked, and there, sure enough, was the bullet mark. But, hello, what's this?
It was a lady's handbag of crocodile skin and silver, sitting on the study table. Inside were 20 50-pound notes of the Bank of England. Nothing else.
1,000 pounds! An unusual lady, this Elsie Cubitt. This must be preserved, for it will be important in the trial. See to it, Inspector. Now, it is necessary that we try to throw some light on the 3rd bullet, which was clearly, from the splintering of the wood, fired from inside the room. I would like to see Mr. King, the cook, again.
The constable left the room, returning a moment later with the cook.
You said, Mr. King, that you were awakened by a loud explosion. Tell me, did the first explosion seem louder than the second one?
Well, sir, it did seem very loud.
You don't think it might have been 2 shots fired almost at the same time?
I certainly couldn't say, sir.
I believe it was. I think, Inspector Martin, that we have learned all that this room can teach us. If you would kindly come with me, we will see what fresh evidence the garden has to offer us.
Sherlock Holmes's client, Hilton Cubitt, who had come to him for help with the mysterious dancing men that had been appearing on his property, terrifying his wife Elsie, has been killed, and Elsie horribly wounded by a bullet to the head. The game is deadly serious now. Join us tomorrow here on BeFM Drama to see how the mystery is unraveled in the gripping 4th episode of our 5-part adaptation of The Dancing Men.